Masechet Kiddushin Daf Lamed Gimel. On the previous daf, we saw a long baraita, the midrash halacha that detailed the laws of standing up and showing reverence for an elder. So we started analyzing the beginning of it. Now we're going to analyze the rest of it piece by piece. Amar mor, yachol yahadirenu b'mamon, tamod omar takum v'hadarta, makima she'en ba chesron kis, afidur she'en bo chesron kis. So the question was, do you have to use money in order to honor an elder? And the answer is no, because we're comparing honor. Honor would include other ways of honoring, helping out, giving a hand, speaking in a reverential way. Which is different from standing. So regarding standing, that doesn't cost any money just to stand up. So too, other forms of reverence, one does not need to spend money on that. So that's how we learn that you do not, although you have to revere an elder and stand up for them, but just like standing up is free, so too, the types of reverence one has to have for an elder, other types are also without spending one's own money. Now we ask, is that true that standing up never involves loss of money? What if, for example, someone is involved in piercing pearls, making holes in pearls so that, I guess, they can make a necklace. And so this is a very profitable occupation. And if you have to stand up, then you have to stop what you're doing, even if it's just for 1 minute. So now you didn't make money during that minute of how many pearls you could have done. And so he is, in fact, losing money by standing up. So it's not true that standing up involves no loss of money. Rather, we're going to learn the other way around. We're comparing standing up to reverence. Reverence, you do not have to stop work in order to show reverence for someone. If you're in the middle of work, then you don't have to stop it. So there's no loss of money. And we also compare them the other way around. And just like regarding standing up, that does not involve loss of money. So too, reverence does not involve loss of money. So by adding this extra step, we learn that just like you don't have to stop working for reverence, so you don't have to stop working for standing up. Therefore, we resolve this problem. If you're in the middle of work and an elder passes by, you don't need to stop and stand up, right? We learn that from reverence. You're in the middle of work, so you don't have to. And so you won't lose money that way. And otherwise, if you're just standing up, that doesn't cost any money to stand up. And so we learn that both standing and reverence do not involve any loss of money nor loss of work. And based on this, we learn that someone who's involved in work is not permitted, even not doesn't have to, but even not permitted to stand up for a Talmid Chacham when they are engaged in their work. This is certainly true. The En Rashai would certainly apply if you're working for someone else. So now, if I'm stopping to work to stand up for this elder, then I'm stealing from my employer. If I'm working on my own, then it's my choice. If I want to stop working, I can, but I don't have to. Now we ask, Velo, is that true that people working don't have to stand up? V'hatenan, kol ba'alei umaniyot omdim mipenehem v'shoalim b'shlomam v'omrim lehem achenu anshe makom peloni bo'achem leshalom. This is a Mishnah in Bikurim. When the farmers bring their Bikurim to Yerushalayim, we want to encourage them to come. So therefore, everybody in Jerusalem, whatever the craftsmen, whatever they're doing, they stop what they're doing and they stand for the pilgrims. And they say, welcome, how are you doing? Right? Our brethren, where are you from? Right? Oh, you came from Yericho. Wow, you came from Be'er Sheva. Right? Welcome. And so you want to give them a nice greeting to encourage them. And here you see they stop working in order to fulfill this mitzvah and encourage the pilgrims. Therefore, we can learn that one should stop work in order to greet the pilgrims and stand up for Tamid Chacham. No, we stand up for them, for the pilgrims. This is a special mitzvah that we need to encourage, but not for Tamidei Chachamim. Tamidei Chachamim, it's not someone's going to stop being a scholar because someone didn't stand up for them. If that's the only reason that they became a rabbi, that's not a good reason in the first place. And so this is a special mitzvah that, yes, for this you have to stop and greet them, but it's not applicable to every sage when one is working. Amar Rabbi Yosef bar Avin, Bore kama chaviva mitzvah b'sha'ata. Sharei mipenehem omdim, mipnei tamidei chachamim en omdim. And Rabbi Yosef bar Avin makes this very point. Come see how beloved is a mitzvah that's done at its proper time, because you see the pilgrims, we stand up before them, encourage them to come and bring bikurim, very special mitzvah, and that is true even though for a Tamid Chacham, one would not stop work and stand up. So that's how great mitzvah is. It's not lowering down the honor one has to give to a Tamid Chacham, but rather raising up the greatness of encouraging a mitzvah. Now, this is not necessarily a proof, because it could be that the reason we stop to work to stand up is because if we don't stop and encourage them, then in the future they will not want to bring the bikurim, and so that's why it's a special law for this. It's not that we love the mitzvot more than we want to honor Tamidei Chachamim. It's just that we want to avoid a major problem that if we don't encourage them, they're going to remember last year we brought all these first fruit and everybody ignored us. Well, they weren't ignoring, they were just busy at work, but it's going to feel like they're being ignored. And so in order to avoid that problem, that's why the rabbis went out of the way to say, even stop work to encourage the mitzvah. Amar Mor, now back to the original baraita that we saw in the previous stuff. We asked, should one stand up for an elder even in the bathroom or in the bathhouse? We said no, it's not. It's supposed to be out of reverence, and that's not so reverential. Remember, in the bathhouse, they're not wearing bathing suits. So, someone comes in, you stand up. It's not exactly respectful. So now we ask, Velo, is it true that you don't stand up? Look at the story of Rabbi Chia. He was sitting in the bathhouse and Rabbi Shimon, the son of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, passed by, and Rabbi Chia did not stand up for him. And Rabbi Shimon, the son of Rabbi, got upset. And he came and told his father, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and says, I taught him 2 of the Chumashim of Sefer Tehillim. Sefer Tehillim is split up into 5 sections, Chumashim, parallel to the Chamisha Chumshei Torah. I taught him 2/5 of Sefer Tehillim. Right? That's a lot. That's a significant amount. And he doesn't stand up before me. So we see from here that the expectation is one should stand up even in a bathhouse. That's story number 1. Similar story. ו2, בר כפרה, ואמרי לה רבי שמואל בר רבי יוסי, הווייתי במסכותה, על והזיל רבי שמעון בר רבי, ולא קם מקמה. So one of these 2 rabbis, let's say bar kapara, was sitting in the bathhouse, and the same rabbi, Rabbi Shimon, the son of Rabbi, came in, and Bar Kapara did not stand up for him. Vikpad, and again Rabbi Shimon was upset. And again he came and told his father, and he told his father, I taught him 2 out of 3 sections of the 2/3 of a third, meaning 2 out of 9 sections of Torah Kohanim. Torah Kohanim is the Sifra, that's the Midrash Halacha on Sefer Vayikra. Very difficult work. It's split up into 9 sections. I taught him 2 of the 9 sections, meaning a significant amount, and he didn't stand before me. We learn incidentally that doesn't have to be the rabbi who teaches you everything A to Z. Even a rabbi who teaches you a section of Torah, also, one should stand up before them. So he tells his father, his father, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, is giving the benefit of the doubt to Bar Kapara, and said maybe he was sitting and thinking about though that very section that you taught him. That's why he wasn't doing it to spite you, but you should see it as an honor. You taught him so well that all he can think about all the time is those two sections of Torat Kohanim, and he was sitting, and that's why he didn't realize that you came in. This sounds to me like it was meant sarcastically, the Rebbe's telling his son, "Okay, relax, don't worry about it so much. He's in the bathhouse, right? You're taking taking offense to this. It's probably not a coincidence that both stories are about the same rabbi. Keeps coming into the bathhouse and looking around and saying, how come people aren't standing up for me?" So his father says, "Well, don't take it so don't be upset about this. Maybe he's thinking about the very thing that you taught him, right? And so you should be happy about it." Okay, anyway, the point of the story here is that he did get upset, and even the Rebbe, if we take it not sarcastically, agreed that he should get up. That means you should get up in a bathhouse. That goes against the Baraita. And the Gemara elaborates on its question, Tama de behen yoshev umarher, halav hachila. The only reason why the Yehuda Nasi excused Bar Kapara is because he was sitting and thinking of Torah. So, okay, he didn't realize that Rabbi Shimon came in. That's why it's okay. But if not, he should have gotten up, and that shows that you should stand up in a bathhouse. So how do we explain that? Based on the Baraita that says you don't stand up in a bathhouse. La kashya ha bebate gavai ha bebate barai. No, where the Baraita was talking about the inner rooms. If you see his picture here, you see there's inner rooms. That's like the steam room. Where people are not clothed. So there, it's not appropriate to stand up. It's not an honor to stand up there. Whereas the story that we just mentioned, where he should have gotten up, was talking about the outer room. That's like the lounge area where people are clothed, and so that's where Rabbi Shimon was when he walked in, and he said, "Oh, they should have stood up." And in fact, this interpretation also makes sense from the details of the story. After all, Rabbi Yochanan said that one can think about Torah everywhere, but not in the bathhouse or in the bathroom. And since Rabbi said, "Oh, maybe he was thinking about Torah," obviously he wasn't thinking about Torah in the bathhouse itself, in the steam room there, but rather in the outer room. There it would be permitted to think about Torah, and so that's a good proof. We say, well, not necessarily a proof, because if it's beyond your control, that's different. In other words, you should not try purposely to think about Torah in the bathhouse, in the bathroom, but if it's on your mind, you can't get it off your mind, right? We should all have such problems that we can't get Torah out of our mind, then it's not a violation, it's not a problem. So, I mean, you could explain this, you could still explain the story as being inside the inside the bathhouse itself, so you don't have to explain it this way, but you can explain it this way. I would say that if in fact we're talking about in the bathhouse itself, inside the steam room, that would add to the my interpretation that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was being sarcastic, like you expected him to stand up in the bathroom? Oh, maybe he was thinking about Torah, he was thinking about the things that you taught him, right, in the bathroom. So I think that would be funny. All right, so it's not necessarily proof, but we do have a good answer. Yachol yasim ayanav kimi shelo ra'ahu. And the Gemara Braita taught that, is it possible, what can you say, that is it permitted for one to close his eyes and make believe he doesn't see the elder, so he doesn't have to stand up? And we said, no, you should, God knows your true intention, and you should not do that. We ask on that Braita, we're talking about wicked people. What kind of person would do that, right? You see an elder coming, and he's right in front of you, and you close your eyes, make believe you don't see him, right? Who would do that? You don't need a special teaching to say that someone should not be that evil. Rather, we're wondering about whether a person can close his eyes before he becomes obligated. In other words, the person is far away, the elder is still far away, so you're not obligated to stand up right now. And the person sitting, he's tired, whatever, he doesn't want to stand up, so he'll close his eyes at that point, but before he's obligated. And then he doesn't know if and when the elder comes before him, and that way you might think it's permitted for him to close his eyes so that if and when the elder does come in front of him, he doesn't have to stand. And therefore, the Baraita teaches, Takum v'yareta, you should fear God, and don't do that. Even if he's far away, don't close your eyes, but be aware so that you can stand up before him, right? Especially if you know that he's in the area. So then be on the lookout so that you can stand up and fulfill the mitzvah when he comes near. Tana, ezu kima sheyesh ba hidur. Braita asked, what does that mean, that the standing up, which is reverential? So there's another new Braita that's expanding further, right? When is it called reverential? The original Braita said that it doesn't have to be when he's so far away, but rather when it's clear that you're standing up because you're doing it out of reverence. If you see a sage right very far away and you stand up, it's not clear to anyone that you're doing it on his behalf. So therefore, it should be when he's close by. So now we're saying, how close is close? So this is arba amot. When a person is 6 feet away and you stand up for him, then it's obvious you're doing it out of respect for that person. When it's farther away than that, then maybe you're just standing up. This halacha is true only if it's a sage that is not your primary teacher. He taught you one perek. All right, so you still stand up for him. But if it's your primary teacher who taught you most of the Torah that you know, then within your range of vision, even if it's far away, you should stand up. Well, and then it's not going to be obvious that you're standing up for him. Well, it will be obvious because someone sees you standing up and he knows this is your primary teacher. Not everybody's going to know that some teacher taught you one perek of Tehillim, but everybody will know, oh, this is his main teacher, so it will be obvious. So, and you should go out of your way, go that extra mile, literally an extra mile, to stand up for your main teacher. Abaye, mechi havak hazeh leudne lechamra de Rav Yosef adeate havak kaim. And we illustrate this with the story that Abaye would, even if he saw the ear of Rav Yosef's donkey coming to him, he would already stand up. He didn't even see Rav Yosef, but he knew his donkey's ear, and he would already show reverence. Abaye, havarachib chamara vekamasge aguda denahar sagya. Another story. One time Abaye was riding on a donkey along the bank of the river Sagya. Yatib Rab Meshashiv Rabbanan beidach gisa. His students, Rab Meshashiv and the other rabbis, were sitting on the other side of the river. Velo kamu mikameh. They didn't stand up for him. So Amar lehu Rab Muhakana, am I not your main teacher? Even though he's far away, he's all the way on the other side of the river, still, why did they not stand up? Amrule labadati, and they said, we didn't realize. We're sorry, right? You were all the way far away. We just didn't see you. So that shows that even if someone is far away, for their main teacher, they should stand up. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer. Okay, so now we learned also in that Braita that an elder also has responsibility not to trouble people and go on purpose and in front of everyone to walk in so to make everybody stand up. He should try to avoid that situation. Talmud Omar Zaken v'yareta. How do we know that? Because the pasuk says even the elder should be fearful of God and not attract attention. Amar Abaye naktinan de'i makif haye Abaye makif Rabbi Zera makif. And Abaye said we learned that if a sage will circumnavigate and go, instead of going right down the aisle in the middle of everyone and make everybody stand up, if he goes all the way around into the back door and gets to the front of the room without troubling anyone, then he will live long. And Abaye did that, and Rabbi Zera also did that. Ravina havayatib kameh. One time Ravina was sitting before Rabbi Yirmiyah of Difti, and some guy passed before him without covering his head. More about covering their heads. We learn here that not only sages would cover their head, but also other people, students, would cover their heads in deference, in respect for the teacher. So this guy comes and doesn't cover his head. Amar kama hasif ha-gabra. Ravina said, oh, how rude this guy is. He doesn't show respect. Amar le-dil mami me'tamachse'aninhu degisi ba rabbanan. And Bimiyah of Difti gave him, judged him for the best. and said maybe it comes from Mata Mechasiyah, where there's many rabbis there. Since there's so many rabbis that it's a relatively small city and a lot of rabbis there, so then people are used to rabbis being around, and that's why they don't show their honor. It's be like, if you go to a rabbinic conference, right, and what are you going to do? Stand up every second. There's always a rabbi walking by. So then you get more relaxed about it because everybody's a rabbi there. And so that's why it wasn't a sign of disrespect. It was just that's the way they act over there because everybody's a sage. So many people are sages. So then they're not so careful to go and cover their head and stand up every second. Covering the head would be actually a sign of reverence, right? We talked about standing up and showing reverence. So when if it's there's only a few sages around, okay, then you do something special to show reverence. But if there's so many people around who are sages, then they just act normally. So even though he's not in Mata Mechasiyah and he was in a place where there's not so many sages, where people show reverence and cover their heads, but since he's from there, he's not used to acting in this way. Isi ben Yehuda Omer, Isi ben Yehuda said, any elder, not only a elder who is knowledgeable in Torah, even if someone is just a plain old elder, still you should stand before them. They still deserve respect and have life experience. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, halacha ki isi ben Yehuda. Rabbi Yochanan says that's the halacha. That's in fact how Rambam says it as well. Rabbi Yochanan hava ka'e mikame de sabe de arma'e. Amar kama harpatke adu alayhu dehane. Rabbi Yochanan himself, he said halacha is like that, and he would stand even before Aramean, non-Jewish elders. He said they have great experience in their lifetimes, so it's not just a Torah knowledge, even if they're not even Jewish, but they're elders, they deserve respect. And he would stand before them. Rava mekam la ka'e hidur abad lehu. Rava, he would not stand before such elders, but he would give reverence to them, right? Maybe he would cover his head, or he would go and give them a hand, and whatever he needed to do to help them in different ways, or speak to them in a reverential way. Abaye hava yaheb yada lesabeh. And here we see examples. Abaye would extend a hand to the elder to lean on them, to help them cross the street, right? It's not standing up for them, but this is another form of reverence. Rava mishadar shiluche, Rav Nachman mishadar gozae. Rava would send his agent. He didn't go himself, but he would send a messenger to help an elder. Rav Nachman would send officers. He had servants who were officers to go and assist elders. Amari lav Torah kama Nachman bar Abba ika beshuka. Says if it was not from my Torah that I learned, there's lots of people named Nachman bar Abba, meaning I'm just a regular guy otherwise, but my Torah is what makes me different from everybody else. This explains why he didn't go himself to help the elders. This is like, I got to focus on my Torah, and I don't want Torah to be treated lightly if I would go myself. So therefore, I still want to help the elders. So I send my servants. They don't have nothing better to do. Let them go and help the elders, and I will devote myself to Torah. Amar Rabbi Aibu, Amar Rabbi Yanai. אין תלמיד חכם רשאי לעמוד מפני רבו אלא שחרית וערבית, כדי שלא יהיה כבודו מרובה מכבוד שמיים. A student is not permitted to stand before his teacher more than twice a day, once in the morning and once at night. That's it. Why? So that the honor he shows his teacher should not be greater than the honor he shows to Shamayim. We say Shema, that's giving honor to Hashem. We do that once in the morning and once at night. So that's it. That's all we do. So now if you're going to stand up for your teacher 10 times a day, so you're showing greater reverence for your teacher than for God, so that's it, limited. Once in the morning, once at night. It's like the etiquette of saying good morning, right? How many times do you say good morning? Once when you see the person in the morning, and they say good night. That's it. You don't, even if you see a person 20 times a day, you don't say good morning, good night 10 times, right? It's enough to say hello once in the morning, once in the afternoon. That's it. Well, hold on. We have a challenge to this statement. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar omer, minayin lezaken shelo yatriach, tamud omar zaken veyareta. Rabbi Shimon said, says that an elder should not trouble the students to stand up for him every time he walks in and out. And we learn that because it says the elder himself should fear God. So don't walk in the middle to make everybody stand up for you. And if the student should only stand up once in the morning and once at night, so what's the trouble? He's not troubling them. It's their obligation. They should do at least once in the morning, once at night. It's a proper thing for them to show reverence. And in any case, so they stood up once in the morning. He's not troubling them that every time he goes in they're going to stand up, because they don't need to stand up. They only need to stand up once in the morning. So he's not troubling them. So rather, what do you want to say the opposite? That all day long, any point during the day, they have to keep standing up. Rather, it must in fact mean that the students only, that they don't have to stand up all day long every time he goes in and out, but rather it means only in the morning once and once at night. And nevertheless, the Baraita teaches, Rishon ben Elazar teaches, that even that one time, the teacher should not cause trouble to the students to have to stand. Right? It should be even less. If he can avoid walking in while everybody is there. Remember, they also sat on the floor, so it'd be like, it's a lot more effort when you're sitting on the floor to have to stand up than if you're already just sitting in a chair. So even that one time, the teacher should try to be there first or go around from the back and not make everybody stand up for him. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Kol Talmid Chacham she'en omed mipnei rabo nikra rasha ve'eno marich yamim v'talmudo mishtakeach. A student who does not stand up before his teacher is called wicked, and he will not live long, and his studies he will be forgotten. Shene'emar v'tov lo yeh larasha ve'lo yarich yamim kasel asher enenu yareh midifnei ha'elohim. Pasuk in Kohelet, Rasha will not have goodness and will not live long, who his days are, and it will be like a shadow, because he did not fear before God. So morazo en yodea mahu. In what way did he not fear God? There's many ways of expressing that. Since it says regarding standing up for an elder, so make like a gezerah shava. You show reverence to God by standing up for an elder. He did not show reverence to God, meaning he didn't stand up for his elder, so therefore he gets all of these negative consequences. We ask, it says in the Torah, other times, like don't charge interest, don't have false weights, and fear God. So how do you know it's talking about standing up? Maybe it's talking about those monetary laws. Rabbi Elazar, pene gamar. We explain it's not just the fear of God, but also milifne, from the panim, right? And it says anyone who does not stand from mipene rabo. So because it has the word panim in both places, that shows that it's talking about standing up for one's teacher and not the other laws that don't have the word pene. Ibaya lehu beno vehu rabo mahu la'amod mipene aviv. What if you have a son who teaches his father? Sometimes a son becomes more learned than his father, and the father learns from the son. Is the son required to stand up for his father? Generally, a teacher should not stand up in front of a student. But here, the son is the teacher, but he has to stand up for his father. On the other hand, he's a teacher, so maybe he shouldn't stand up for his student. Well, what's the answer? Tashema da'amar le Shemuel le Rav Yehuda. Shemuel is a teacher of Rav Yehuda, and he's teaching him the right way. Rav Yehuda is the same Rav Yehuda bar Yechezkel that we mentioned in the earlier story. And that's where he was arguing with his father, right? And Shemuel told him, you shouldn't argue with your father in a direct way, you should say it in an indirect way. So here, Shemuel is teaching Rav Yehuda further about Kibud Av. And he says, Shinana, that's his Rav Yehuda's nickname. He was sharp. Kum mikame avuch. You should stand up before your father. So we learn from here that a son should stand up in front of the father, even though the son is the teacher. In this case, Rav Yechezkel is also a sage, but Rav Yehuda is a greater sage. Compared to his son, he is a student before his son. And nevertheless, you should stand up. So is that a good proof? Well, not necessarily. In this case, it could be Shemuel told him to stand up because Rav Yechezkel did great deeds, right? He was Baal Chesed. You learn from here an important principle that one can be a Gadol through Torah, but one can also be a Gadol, worthy of respect, and people should stand up for him if he's known to be a Baal Chesed. He does a lot of good deeds, right? That's also, one should stand up for such a person. So it happens to be that Rav Yechezkel, although he was knowledgeable in Torah, that by itself would not make him worthy of standing up for someone like his colleague Shemuel. But here we see even Shemuel, who was contemporary with Rav Yechezkel. They're both first generation. Shemuel is a greater sage, yet Shemuel would stand up for Rav Yechezkel because of his great deeds. So maybe Shemuel is telling Rav Yehuda, stand up for your father, not because he's your father, but rather because he's great in deeds. And that's why you should stand up for him. I stand up for him also. So it's not necessarily true that a son who is a teacher should necessarily stand up for the father. So we accept that, but now we wonder, then why does he have to say that? In other words, then it would be obvious that he should stand up before Rav Yechezkel if he's great in deeds, stand up for that reason. He's telling him that sometimes, Shemuel speaking, Shemuel says, sometimes Rav Yehuda comes from in back of me. I don't see him coming, and so I'm going to still be sitting. You should nevertheless stand up, because there's another law that a student should not stand up should not give honor to another student in front of the teacher. In other words, if you're my teacher, so normally I should stand up for you. But if your teacher is there also, and I'm going to stand up for the student, you, in front of the teacher, that would be disrespectful to your teacher, because I'm standing up for a student in front of the teacher. So that's a separate law. And so here Shemuel says, I am your teacher, right? And he's even greater than Rav Yechezkel. So in a normal case, Rav Yehuda would not be permitted to stand up before his father in front of both of their teachers, but in this case it's permitted because, after all, Shemuel says, I stand up before Rav Yechezkel, so you certainly should stand up before him as well. And even if I don't stand up, it's only because I don't see him, because he comes from in back of me. But don't worry about my honor, you should still stand up for him. And here we learn it's not necessarily because he's your father, but because he's great in deeds and is worthy of respect just on that account. We now ask the opposite question. Same scenario, that a son is teaching the father. Should the father stand before the son? Usually a father doesn't stand for a son, but in this case the son is his teacher. Should he stand for him? Tashema damar Rabbi Yoshua ben Navi, ani kedai la'amod mipnei beni, ela mishum kebod bet nasi. Rabbi Yoshua ben Navi says, it's not appropriate for me to stand before my son. And even though my son is great, I'm greater than him in Torah. So normally I would not stand before my son. However, my son is married to the house of the Nasi. So now he is associated with that house. I only stand before my son because he's a part of the house of the Nasi. Now we analyze the statement. Tama de'ana rabeh ha'ihu rabai ka'imna mikameh. Let's say he was not part of the house of the Nasi, right? So he says, it would not be appropriate for me to stand for my son, considering that he is not greater in Torah. So that's only because Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi is his teacher. But if not, if the son was greater in Torah, then he would stand before him. So here you go. Here's an answer. A father would stand before a son if the son was greater in Torah. But when we say no, not necessarily. Hachi kamad. Ani kedai la'amon mipnei beni, va'afilu hu rabbai, taha ana avu. Maybe what he was saying is that it would not be appropriate for me to stand for my son, even if he were my teacher, because I'm his father. And so there was no scenario in which I would stand before my son because of his Torah knowledge. But I do stand only because he is now part of the Nasi's household, so I want to show honor to the Nasi. That's why I stand before him. So you can interpret this in the opposite way, and therefore it's not a proof that a father should stand before a son, or not stand before a son. Now we have a question. Let's say a teacher is riding on an animal. Is that like walking, since he's traveling, and so the student should stand before him, or not, since the teacher is sitting? It would be like the same as in a car today. Teacher passes by in a car. Well, the teacher is stationary in relation to the car. He's just sitting. So therefore you don't have to stand up. Or since the teacher is moving, traveling, so it's the same, and you stand up before a teacher in a car or on a horse. So we're going to learn it from an analogy to a Mishnah in Masechet Negaim that's talking about a leper, Mesorah. The law of Mesorah, similar to corpse impurity. If there's a corpse in a tent, then everything in the tent becomes Tameh. That happens right away. When it comes to a Mesorah, it does not happen right away. Only if the Mesorah is stationary for some time in the tent, then everything becomes tameh. But if he's just passing through, moving, not stationary, then the other things do not become tameh. So here's the different scenarios. If the tameh mesorah is sitting, doesn't necessarily mean literally sitting, it just means he's stationary for enough time, but under a tree that leaves are covering also someone else who is tahod, and the tahod person is standing. Doesn't matter, because the misorah is sitting stationary, so the tahod person becomes tameh. The other way around, tameh omed v'tachat ha'ilan v'tahod yosheb tahod. If the tameh person is standing, not stationary, and the tahor person is sitting, so the tahor person is tahor because the mesorah is not stationary enough to cause tuma, impurity. But then, if the mesorah decides to sit and is stationary there for a while, then the tahor person becomes tameh. Now here's the proof from the next part. And the same is true with a stone that has sarat on it. Whoever is holding it would have that same law. So if a person is holding it and is stationary, that would cause tent impurity. If the person holding it is moving, then it would not cause tent impurity. Regarding this law, Rav Nachman bar Kohen, Zot omeret rachuv kemhalech dame shema mina. Rav Nachman bar Kohen learned from this that riding is the same as walking. How do you tell that? Because look at this, we're treating the stone as if it's the rider, and the person holding the stone would be like the animal. So even though the stone, let's say a guy's walking, even though the stone in relation to the person is stationary, right? It's just sitting in his hand. Nevertheless, we don't say that the stationary and causes tent impurity. Rather, we say, since the person is moving, then it's like the stone is also moving and does not cause tent impurity. So we apply the same principle, even though this is a very different law, to the person riding on an animal, that he also, even though he's stationary in relation to the horse, nevertheless the whole unit is moving, and therefore you would have to stand up before a teacher, even if he's riding a horse or going in a bicycle or a car, and so that is a conclusive proof. Does that one have to stand up before a Sefer Torah? It's hard to believe that this is even a question in the Gemara, but everything has a source, so here's the source. Rabbi Chilkiah, Rabbi Simon, Rabbi Elazar Amre. Kal v'chomer pnei lomedei amedim mipaneh lo kol sheken. So we learn kal v'chomer. If you have to stand up before those who learn Torah, then the source of what they're learning, the Torah itself, all the more so, one has to stand up. Rabbi Eli, Rabbi Yaakov bar Zavdi, Havu Yatvi. So these two sages were sitting and studying Torah. Chalif ve'azil Rabbi Shimon bar Abba ve'kamu mikameh. And so Rabbi Shimon bar Abba was walking, and they stood before him. They had to interrupt the Torah learning, and they stood for him. Amar lehu hada datun hakimeh v'ana chaber. But Rabbi Shimon bar Abba said you should not have stood up for two reasons. Number one, you are chachamim. I am only a chaver. I'm only an associate rabbi. I'm not fully ordained, so you should not stand up before me. Ve'od kelum Torah omed mipnei lomedeha. And furthermore, should Torah stand up before those who study it? In other words, you're engaged in Torah at the moment. That's the greatest honor you can give to Torah, is learning it. So you're involved in Torah itself. You're going to stop that and stand up before a person who learns Torah? That doesn't make sense. You should continue learning Torah. So yes, you should stand up for a sage, but only if you're just not doing anything else. If you're learning Torah already, so then honor the Torah by learning it. So we learn from Yosavara Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon bar Abba, who said this. I mean, the first part, maybe he's just being humble, right? But from the second part, you can see that he follows the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, Damar Rabbi Elazar, and Tamid Chacham Rashai La'amod Mipnei Rabbo B'Sha'a She'osek B'Torah. He said that a student is not permitted to stand before his teacher if he's in the middle of learning Torah. You're learning Torah right now, so it's not appropriate to stop learning Torah in order to stand for the teacher. And so that is, as you said, that's exactly what Rabbi Shimon bar Abba said. However, even though he said that, you have that opinion of Rabbi Elazar, Layet ala Abaye. Abaye strongly disagreed with it, and he cursed anyone who would follow that, because even though, yes, technically you're honoring Torah by studying it, but still anyone looking on, it seems disrespectful for the teacher to be passing by, and you don't stand up for the teacher. So therefore, you have to show respect, nevertheless, even in the middle of learning Torah. This pasuk, let's look at it in context, is after Chet HaEgel. And so Moshe took the Ohel Moed, or his Ohel, and put it outside the Machaneh, and he called it Ohel Moed, and anyone who wanted to seek guidance from Hashem would have to go there to Moshe. And here's the pasuk, Vayakeset Moshe la Ohel, Yakumu kol when Moshe went to the tent, everybody would stand up before him. Here's a good source for standing up before a sage, and they would remain standing in front of their tents, and they would look on. They would look at Moshe until he went into his tent. This seems like a positive thing, that they were showing him honor. So let's see how the Gemara interprets it. These two sages, one of them interpreted Bnei Yisrael's gazing upon him in a negative way, and one interpreted as positive. One who says in a negative way explains it as you can find in the Midrash. This is not, the Gemara doesn't quote it maybe because it's so negative, but there is a Midrash Tanchuma that explains when they would look upon him, they would look upon him with suspicion. They would say, oh, look how well fed he is, look how thick his thighs are, he must be eating so well because he's stealing from our money, and he's skimming off the top. So they would just make up terrible rumors about him. Interesting that the rabbis came up with this midrash. It must be that this is a common thing that happened in their times also, right? Even someone so righteous and humble, there's always some wise guy that makes up false accusations. Amad amar l'shebach amar Chizkiah. And the one who says in a favorable way, he interprets the pasuk as Chizkiah did, who said the following statement. Amar li Rabbi Hanina bered Rabbi Abhu, amar Rabbi Abhu, amar Rabbi Abdimi demin Haifa. Hacham ober, omed milefanav arba amot. V'chavan shav arba amot yosheb. If you have a wise person who is passing passing by, one should stand up when they come in proximity of 4 amot and remain standing until they leave the 4 amot circle of where one is, and then you sit down again. So you just have to start standing and finish standing within that 8 amot range. But higher up, that someone who's the head of the Bet Din, he requires more respect. And so, even if you see him far away, as soon as you see him, you should stand up. And then once he passes by you and passes more than 4 amot, then you can sit down. Nasi omed milfanav velo einav ve'eno yoshev ad sheyeshev b'mkomo shneimar v'hibitu acharei Moshe ad bo'o ha'ohela. But if the Nasi, that's the highest leader of the Jewish community, when he passes by, everybody should stand up as soon as they see him from far away, and they should remain standing until the Nasi sits in his place, right, in his own chair. And how do you know that? Because it says the Bnei Israel would gaze upon Moshe until he got to his ohel. So you see, this is in praise. They were standing up out of respect, and they remained standing, and they watched until they watched him go into his ohel, and only then they would sit down. So this shows the praise and the proper way that one should stand before the greatest of the generation. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.